This statement defies logic, challenges aviation physics, and represents one of the most daring feats of airmanship in the entire Second World War. In the freezing skies over Nazi-occupied Europe, a mortally wounded flying fortress, its crew bleeding and its landing gear sheared away, faced a seemingly inescapable doom, a crash landing that would almost certainly incinerate all 10 men aboard. With fuel gauges hovering near empty and the English Channel a dark, forbidding expanse below, the young captain at the controls would be forced to concoct a plan born of sheer desperation and brilliant improvisation. He would not attempt to ditch in the water. He would not bail his crew out over enemy territory. Instead, he would guide his 30-ton aluminum giant back to his base and perform a maneuver never before attempted, nor documented since: a belly landing on the closed bomb bay doors. This is the harrowing story of Captain James Jimmy Thayer of the 306th Bombardment Group, the B-17F Flying Fortress nicknamed Old Ironsides, and the impossible decision that had to be made on February 14, 1944. To appreciate the magnitude of Captain Thayer's predicament, we must first understand the brutal calculus of the air war over Europe in early 1944. The U.S. 8th Air Force was deep into its campaign of strategic daylight bombing, targeting German industrial and military infrastructure at tremendous cost. The 306th Bomb Group, based at RAF Thurla, was a veteran unit, its crews hardened by months of combat. Their aircraft was the Boeing B-17F Flying Fortress, a 4-engine heavy bomber renowned for its durability and defensive firepower, armed with 1350 caliber machine guns. But it was not invincible. On the morning of February 14, 1944, the target was the heavily defended fighter production facilities at Leipzig, deep in the heart of Germany. It was a maximum effort mission involving hundreds of bombers. Captain James Thayer, a 24-year-old from Spokane, Washington, was piloting B-17F-4229775, Old Ironsides. He was respected as a calm, competent, and thoughtful pilot, not given to flashy heroics but possessing an innate feel for his aircraft. His crew of 9 others, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio man, flight engineer, and 4 gunners, were a tight-knit group, having survived 7 previous missions together. The mission to Leipzig was, from the start, a nightmare. German anti-aircraft flak was intense and accurate over the target. As Old Ironsides entered its bomb run, flying straight and level at 25,000 feet, a shell burst directly beneath the aircraft's belly. The concussion was violent, shaking the entire airframe. Shrapnel sliced through the thin aluminum skin. In the cockpit, warning lights flickered. The intercom filled with damage reports. The ball turret gunner was wounded, the radio room damaged, and, most critically, the hydraulic lines for the landing gear were severed, fluid spraying into the freezing slipstream. Worse, a second flak burst moments later mangled the right wing's main landing gear assembly, leaving it dangling uselessly. Thayer and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Doyle, fought to keep the plane stable as they released their bombs and turned for home. The initial assessment was grim but survivable. They had lost one wheel and hydraulics. They could possibly crank the remaining gear down manually, or even land on one wheel and a wingtip. But the ordeal was far from over. As the battered formation struggled back towards the channel, swarms of German Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters attacked the stragglers. Old Ironsides, visibly wounded and losing altitude, was a prime target. In a furious 5-minute running battle, the bomber's gunners claimed 2 fighters, but not before a 20mm cannon shell from EFW-190 ripped into the left wing root, severing the lines to the left main landing gear and setting the fuel transfer system on fire. The flight engineer, Sergeant Micah Bryan, managed to extinguish the flames, but the damage was done. A final check, confirmed by the waist gunners peering out at the wings, revealed the catastrophic truth. Both main landing gear assemblies were completely destroyed, hanging by shreds of metal. The nose wheel, relying on the same shattered hydraulic system, was also stuck in as well. Old Ironsides had no wheels at all. It was, for all intents and purposes, a 30-ton glider with 4 straining engines heading for a crash landing. The mood in the aircraft shifted from determined survival to cold, creeping dread. Captain Thayer's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but controlled. "All right, listen up. We've taken severe gear damage. Both mains and the nose wheel are inoperative. We are not going to bail out. I repeat, We are not bailing out over the Channel or France. Bailing out meant capture or death in the icy water for most. Thayer's decision to try and bring the ship home bound the crew's fate together, for better or worse. We're going to make for England. We're going to try and land. The statement was met with silence. Every man aboard knew what a wheels-up landing in a B-17 typically meant. The metal belly would screech along the runway, sending up a fountain of sparks that would almost instantly ignite any remaining fuel, leading to a catastrophic fireball. Survival rates were near zero. Navigator Lieutenant Carl Riggs provided a heading for the nearest friendly coast. The white cliffs of Dover were still 80 miles away. The B-17, flying at a perilously low 8,000 feet to conserve fuel and maintain control on 2 damaged engines, was a sitting duck. Yet, miraculously, the German fighters, low on fuel and ammunition themselves, broke off the attack. The immediate threat of enemy fire was gone, replaced by the slower, more sinister threat of physics and gravity. For the next hour, Old Ironsides limped across the English Channel. Thayer and Doyle worked in sync, managing engine power, nursing the wounded bird along. The flight engineer and radio man worked frantically to lighten the aircraft, jettisoning anything not bolted down. Ammunition boxes, damaged machine guns, even the classified Norden bomb sight, was thrown into the sea. Every pound removed increased their gliding distance, their margin of life. Thayer ran through the emergency procedures in his mind. A ditching in the Channel was a last resort. The B-17 was notoriously poor at water landings, likely to cartwheel and break apart. A belly landing on a grass field might be softer, but without a prepared emergency crew, a fire was almost certain. He needed a runway. He needed Thurla. As the green English coastline emerged from the haze, a new problem presented itself. Skipper, radio man Sergeant Joe Petrovsky called out, "Thurla Tower reports the field is socked in." Fog bank rolled in. Visibility less than a quarter mile. The news was a gut punch. They couldn't land blind. Thayer requested and received clearance for the emergency field at RAF Manston, a coastal airfield in Kent famously equipped with long runways and a specialized crash crew for damaged bombers. Manston was their only hope. As they crossed the coast near Folkestone, the true extent of their vulnerability became apparent. British anti-aircraft batteries, seeing a lone, smoking, wobbling B-17 with no landing gear visible, mistook it for a German aircraft attempting a deception. A burst of flak erupted frighteningly close off their port wing. "They're shooting at us," yelled the tail gunner. Petrovsky frantically radioed their identity and emergency status on the agreed-upon frequency. The British guns fell silent, but the terror of those moments was searing. By 1500 hours, Old Ironsides was on final approach for RAF Manston. The control tower had cleared all traffic. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the long, concrete runway. From the cockpit, Thayer could see the waiting emergency vehicles, tiny specks of red and white. The runway looked impossibly hard, impossibly narrow. Standard procedure for a belly landing was to cut all engines, flare the aircraft, and let it settle. But Thayer's engineering mind was racing. The B-17's belly was not flat. It was punctuated by the oval bulge of the ball turret, now retracted, and, most significantly, the long closed doors of the bomb bay. The bomb bay doors were made of relatively thin metal, designed to open in flight, not bear weight, but they protruded slightly below the line of the main fuselage. A theory, a desperate, insane theory, formed in his mind. What if he could land only on the bomb bay doors? The doors would crumple and absorb the initial impact, acting like a crude skid, keeping the more vulnerable fuel cells in the wings and the main fuselage structure off the concrete for a few precious seconds longer. It might just prevent the sparking that led to fire. He discussed it quickly with Doyle and O'Brien, the flight engineer. It was a gamble with astronomical odds, but it was the only gamble they had. The crisis was not a single moment, but a slow, agonizing descent into a known inferno. As they are lined up on the runway at Manston, he went through the final checks. Prepare for crash landing. Assume brace positions. The crew, in their various stations, fastened their harnesses, leaned forward, and braced themselves against whatever solid structure they could find. The wounded ball turret gunner was pulled up and secured in the radio room. The silence in the aircraft was deafening, broken only by the ragged roar of the 2 remaining good engines and the whistling wind through the shrapnel holes. Below them, the gray concrete of the runway rushed up. They were committed. Thayer's hands were steady on the controls, his focus absolute. He needed to achieve a perfect, nose-high attitude, a flare, to present the bomb bay doors as the primary, and ideally the sole, point of contact. Too low, and the entire belly would slam down. Too high, and the tail would strike first, sending them into a disastrous tumble. At 100 feet, he began to ease back on the yoke. At 50 feet, he chopped the throttles on the two working engines. The sudden silence was more frightening than the engine noise. Old Ironsides became a silent, falling mass of metal. Thayer pulled back further, holding the nose up, fighting the sinking feeling. He could see the texture of the runway concrete, the seams between the slabs. This was it. The first contact was not the expected, grinding scream of metal, but a series of rapid, violent thuds and a terrifying high-pitched screech as the leading edges of the bomb bay doors made contact and were instantly shredded. The aircraft shuddered violently, throwing the men against their restraints. A shower of sparks, orange and white, erupted from beneath the fuselage, visible in the cockpit side windows like a demonic fireworks display. The sound was apocalyptic, a cacophony of ripping, grinding, and shrieking metal. Thayer and Doyle held the yoke back with all their strength, but the nose began to drop. The bomb bay doors, disintegrating, were doing their job, but they wouldn't last. Then, the secondary impact. The reinforced area around the ball turret socket hit the runway. The screech deepened, the vibration intensified. A new, more sinister fountain of sparks flew up past the left side windows. A fuel leak? An electrical short? In the cockpit, warning lights flickered and died as systems shorted out. The world was reduced to noise, vibration, and the overwhelming smell of scorched metal and ozone. The aircraft was slowing, but it was still sliding down the runway at over 80 miles per hour, completely out of control, a meteorite of spark and flame. Thayer had no brakes, no steering. He could only hold on and pray the runway was long enough and that the inevitable fire would hold off for just a few more seconds. The end of the runway, marked by a low fence and a field beyond, rushed toward them. They were not going to stop in time. The crisis reached its zenith. They had survived the impact, but they were now going to careen off the end of the runway, likely digging a wing into the soft earth and cartwheeling. All this effort, all this ingenuity, would end in a tangled, burning wreck just yards from safety. The fire crews chased them down the runway, unable to get close due to the shower of sparks. It was a spectacle of horrific inevitability. In the final sliding seconds of the landing run, Captain Thayer's quick thinking, which had brought them this far, manifested once more. He saw the end of the runway approaching. He saw the grass field beyond. He also saw, to the right side of the runway's end, a wide, soft area of rain-saturated mud, part of an oversuit area used for emergency arrests. It was their only chance. With the aircraft still sliding with significant momentum, he used the last vestige of aerodynamic control. The right aileron was still partially functional. He nudged the control wheel to the right. The wounded B-17, still skidding on its belly, began a slow, agonizing turn to starboard, away from the hard runway edge and towards the soft mud. It was a maneuver of breathtaking audacity, attempting to steer a 30-ton sled. The left wingtip, dipping low, caught the edge of the concrete for a moment, sending a fresh cascade of sparks and a jarring shudder through the airframe. But the turn continued. The nozzle strut, still locked in its well, dug into the mud as they left the runway, acting like a crude plow. This sudden anchor point, combined with the immense drag of the soft, wet earth, was the final braking force they needed. The aircraft's forward momentum was violently arrested. It slewed sideways, the tail swinging around with a groan of tortured metal, and came to a sudden, lurching stop. The silence that followed was absolute and surreal, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the distant sirens of the approaching fire trucks. For a few seconds, no one moved. The expected fireball had not come. The sparks had ceased. They were down. They were alive. And they were not on fire. Thayer's voice, hoarse but clear, broke the silence on the intercom. Report. Everyone sound off. One by one, shaken voices called out from each station. Pilot okay. Co-pilot okay. Navigator okay. Miraculously, through the violent impact and slide, not a single man had sustained further injury. The wounded gunner was still conscious. They had done it. The plan, born of desperation and executed with precision, had worked. The bomb bay doors had sacrificed themselves, absorbing the brutal initial impact and preventing the fuel-laden wings from direct contact with the concrete just long enough. The soft mud had finished the job, but the ordeal was not quite over. The smell of gasoline was strong in the air. A stray spark could still doom them. Evacuate. Now. Out every hatch and window, Thayer ordered. The crew moved with practiced speed, though their limbs were trembling with adrenaline and shock. The waste gunners kicked out the damaged waste windows and tumbled onto the wet grass. The navigator and bombardier scrambled out through the nose hatch. Thayer and Doyle helped the wounded gunner out of the radio room hatch before exiting themselves. They stumbled away from the aircraft, the cold English air feeling like the sweetest breath they had ever taken. The Manston crash crews descended on Old Ironsides, foam hoses at the ready, but there was no fire to fight. The bomber sat in the mud, its belly torn open, its bomb bay doors gone, its propellers bent, a grotesque but triumphant wreck. 10 men stood watching, their flying fortress a total loss, but their lives, against all conceivable odds, preserved. The aftermath was a blur of medical checks, debriefings, and sheer disbelief. The crew of Old Ironsides was given a week's survivor's leave. Captain James Thayer was immediately summoned to higher command. The officers who reviewed the gun camera footage from a following aircraft and the reports from the Manston ground crews were astounded. A belly landing in a B-17 without a fatal fire was rare enough. A deliberate landing on the bomb bay doors, followed by a controlled slide and turn into mud to avoid overrun, was unprecedented. It was a masterpiece of airmanship under conditions of extreme duress. For his extraordinary skill, exceptional presence of mind, and supreme devotion to duty at the risk of his own life and the lives of his crew, Captain James Thayer was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. The citation specifically highlighted his deliberate decision to utilize the bomb bay doors as impact absorbers in his final, skillful maneuver to ground the aircraft in soft earth, thereby preventing certain destruction by fire. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Doyle, and Flight Engineer Sergeant Mike O'Brien received Silver Stars for their crucial roles in managing the damaged aircraft and advising on the unorthodox landing plan. The entire crew was decorated. The story of Old Ironsides became instant legend within the 8th Air Force, a tangible symbol of the never-give-up ethos. Engineers studied the wreckage, and while they didn't recommend bomb bay door landings as procedure, they learned valuable lessons about fuel system vulnerabilities and landing gear protection. James Thayer completed his tour of 25 missions, a miraculous feat in itself, and returned to the United States. He remained in the Air Force after the war, eventually retiring as a colonel. He rarely spoke in detail about the landing at Manston, deflecting praise to his crew and the durability of the B-17. His legacy, however, is immortal. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity in the face of mechanical failure. Thayer was not just a pilot following a checklist. He was an engineer in a crisis, diagnosing a unique problem and inventing a unique solution in real time, with 10 lives hanging in the balance. He demonstrated that courage is not just the absence of fear, but the presence of a thinking, analytical mind when fear is screaming loudest. He didn't just crash land his plane. He flew it onto the ground, using every last bit of its structure and the environment to cheat death. He proved that even when all conventional systems fail, the most important system, the human mind, can still find a way. He brought his ship and his men home on a wing, a prayer, and a bomb bay. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to War Legend Recorded as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.